Why being a pirate was pure misery. Boring history for sleep. Pirate life was not filled with gold or glory or grand adventures, despite what stories and songs might say. It was instead a long gray stretch of discomfort and exhaustion at sea, a slow rhythm of hunger, dampness, and endless waiting. The sea itself was not blue and sparkling, but heavy and shifting and full of salt that clung to skin and clothes and eyes. The wind was not romantic, it was harsh and constant and loud, so loud that men forgot what silence felt like. When a man became a pirate, it was often not by choice. Many were sailors who had lost their ships, or their wages, or their patience with cruel captains. Some were pressed into it by others, forced to sign on under threat, or simply because there was nowhere else to go. The idea of freedom at sea was mostly a dream. The reality was work without rest, food without flavor, and danger without end. The ship itself was small and crowded, every inch filled with rope, barrels, water casks, muskets, and the sour smell of sweat and salt. The deck never stopped moving, even when the waves were calm. The boards creaked, and the sails groaned, and the smell of tar mixed with human waste in the heat. There was no shade, only the faint hope of breeze. The men slept where they could, often on damp boards with rats for company. Sleep was light and broken by the sound of the watch bells and the slap of ropes against the mast. There was no privacy, no peace. The only thing that belonged to a man was his knife, and sometimes not even that. They ate salt meat when they had it, and hard biscuit when they didn't. The biscuit was full of weevils, small white worms that crunched between the teeth, but hunger was stronger than disgust. Fresh food was rare, fruit spoiled and vegetables rotted. The water turned green in the casks after a few weeks and smelled of rot and iron. They drank it anyway because thirst was worse. Rum was used to make it taste better, but rum also dulled the mind and made tempers short. Fights broke out easily over cards or words or even a look, and the captain's punishment was swift and cruel. The lash cut deep, and salt rubbed in made sure the wounds did not heal fast. A man with scars was not rare on a pirate ship. He was normal. Disease spread fast. Scurvy made gums rot and teeth fall out. Fever burned through crews and left men shaking in their hammocks. There were no doctors, only a man with a knife and some rum and hope. If a limb was lost, it was sawed off with no mercy, and the screaming was drowned by the sea. The promise of treasure kept them moving, but treasure was rare. Most ships carried little of worth. Sometimes they found barrels of cloth or tobacco or grain, things that had to be sold or traded for coin. The gold and silver came only now and then, and when it did, it was gone fast, spent on drink and women and dice. The next day, hunger began again. Ports were dangerous places. Pirates were hunted, and the law waited for them. Men went ashore fast, drank fast, spent fast, and ran fast before the gallows found them. The women they met were often as desperate as they were. Some followed the ships for safety, others for money. The sea took everything from everyone and gave back little. Pirates made their own laws and called it the code, but it was not freedom, it was survival. Every man had a vote, but if he crossed the wrong man, his body could be thrown overboard before sunrise. The captains were chosen by vote, but ruled by fear. They had to be strong enough to command, but not so cruel that the men turned on them. Mutiny was always close. It hung in the air like the smell of gunpowder. Sometimes it happened quietly, a knife in the dark. Sometimes loudly, with shouting and blood on the deck. When they met a ship they wanted to take, the silence ended suddenly. The drums beat, the guns rolled out, and the air filled with smoke and screams. Cannon fire tore through wood and flesh. The noise was so loud it made ears ring for hours after the fight. The decks were slick with blood, and the smell of burnt powder clung for days. The wounded cried until their voices broke, and then there was only the sea again, calm and endless, as if nothing had happened. Prisoners were sometimes kept, sometimes killed, sometimes left adrift. It depended on the mood of the captain and the needs of the crew. Mercy was not common, but neither was cruelty for pleasure. It was all practical. Everything was done for survival. When a ship sank, it went fast, wood splintering, men shouting, the cold water closing over heads and dragging bodies down. Few could swim, and those who could did not last long. The sea was a hard master. It took men as easily as it gave them wind. Sometimes the ships drifted for days in calm with no wind at all, the sails hanging limp, the sun burning, and the men lying still to save energy. The water ran low and men whispered about rain. The first drop was like a blessing, and they held out their tongues to catch it. Storms were worse. The waves rose higher than masts. The sky went black and lightning tore across the clouds. The ship pitched and rolled, and men clung to ropes, praying or cursing or both. Sometimes the mast snapped, and the ship was left broken, drifting with no hope, only waiting. Pirates did not fear death. They lived with it every day. But they feared dying slow, of hunger, of thirst, of sickness, of the sea closing over them with no one to hear their last breath. They buried their dead at sea, wrapped in cloth and slid into the deep. The splash was small and soon gone. Some said prayers, some said nothing. The waves took the body, and the ship sailed on, and the smell of death stayed longer than the memory. The clothes rotted, the boots cracked, the skin burned in the sun. Salt covered everything. It was in the eyes, in the food, in the wounds. It was never gone. Some men went mad from the endless motion and the sameness of it all. The horizon never changed. The sea was always there, moving without end. They dreamed of land, but land meant danger and law and gallows. The rope and the hangman's smile haunted them even in sleep, if they slept at all. The songs they sang were low and slow, meant to keep time, not to bring joy. Their laughter was dry and without warmth. The only real peace came when the ship rocked gently and the stars shone, and for a moment the sea looked kind. But it was a lie. It always was. The life of a pirate was not freedom. It was a cage made of salt and wood and fear. The promise of riches was a bait that led to misery. The flags they raised were symbols not of glory, but of desperation, skulls and bones to frighten others before they were themselves destroyed. They lived short and hard, and died forgotten. Sometimes the sea took the ship whole. Sometimes the gallows took the crew. The end was always the same. The world forgot their names, and only the sea remembered their cries. The ship's bell rang dull and slow, and time drifted like the tide. A man could spend years and see nothing but waves, clouds, and the same faces, all worn by wind and hunger. The world beyond the sea faded into stories and dreams. Sometimes a man would talk of home, a farm, a wife, a mother, but the words sounded strange after so long, as if he were telling someone else's life and not his own. Even the youngest aged fast, hair turning gray, skin leathered by sun and salt, the eyes dulled and tired. The only thing that stayed bright was the knife's edge, sharp and waiting. Life on land was not waiting for them. They could never return. The law did not forgive, and no one trusted a pirate, even if he swore he was done with the sea. Once a pirate was always a pirate. That was the curse that followed them. Some tried to hide, change their names, become fishermen or dockhands, but someone always remembered, someone always told, and the rope always waited. They were not heroes, not villains, just men trapped by the sea and by their own choices. The sea did not care. It kept moving. It always did. The sails flapped, the ropes creaked, and the waves whispered the same sound over and over, a sound that was neither kind nor cruel, just endless. The endlessness was the hardest part of it all. It wore away thought and feeling until a man was little more than the work he did. He tied ropes, hauled sails, cleaned decks, loaded guns, ate when told, slept when allowed. Everything became motion without meaning. The days melted into one another, and the nights were not different, only darker. The stars were always the same, and the moon rose and fell without care for who lived or died below. The ship itself seemed alive, creaking, sighing, whispering in the dark.